Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be speaking at this virtual summit on the topic of how mental health, a pandemic in the making. My name is Dr. Marcus Ranney. I am the General Manager of Thrive Global in India. Now, we've seen the decade preceding this one, so coming into the year 2020, around the world, we had already begun to see the rising epidemic of stress and burnout. Different countries, different societies, different cultures. And part of that was because of us building this framework around how we define success, or rather, how society defines success for us, this delusion of success being part of either money or power, and therefore delivering it through what we have. The accumulation of material gains in our lives led to particular sacrificial behaviors around who we are through that process. And things that we decided to give up are things like sleep, relationships, our health, our well-being. In fact, a Times job survey that was conducted in 2018 here in India found that 80% of all corporate employees were already stressed at work, 60% of them wanting to leave their jobs directly because of that. A Gallup study, again conducted in 2018 in the same year, found that only 13% of all the employees that they surveyed were actually engaged in their particular work. And the number of people who actually recorded that they were quote unquote thriving was at an all-time low. The World Happiness Index, which is conducted every year around the world across 156 countries. India, where did we fall? At 144. It was the sequential year since 2013. In every single year since then, we have sequentially gotten worse and worse in our particular score. The WHO, as per their records, we are now officially the most depressed country on earth, close to 60 million people living with depression in India. A third of our workforce, as per their analysis, will suffer from either stress, anxiety, or depression in the next 2 years. And a lot of it was due to the fact that whilst we work the most number of hours, we actually are not as productive compared to some other Western counterparts. Last year, the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, actually classified burnout as an actual disease as per the International Classification of Disorders. And as per the American Institute of Stress, workplace stress was the 5th leading contributor towards death, leading to 120,000 deaths in the US alone. That's roughly 190 billion US dollars. So what is the COVID-19 contribution now? We already, as I tried to articulate, had a background impact of stress, anxiety, and burnout in the population. How has COVID-19 added to that? Well, we've seen the unemployment figures around the world. In the US alone, 30 million individuals have already filed for unemployment benefits. The World Economic Forum has called this the largest psychological experiment ever conducted in 70 countries and territories around the world. Today, there are close to half of our global population who are living under conditions of lockdown. And in the previous epidemic, when SARS came about a few years ago, we saw that there was a rise in substance abuse, in addictions, in domestic violence, in post-traumatic stress disorders, and a whole host of other mental disorders. A recent poll conducted in the US found that 45% of adults are already complaining about the negative impact on their mental health and stress. And we are seeing some of the surrogate markers of that already in India. Content consumption has risen close to 200x over the last few weeks. Religious programming has also risen, almost 45%, going up. Social media consumption has jumped 50x from where it was just 6 to 8 weeks ago. And pornography viewing has also risen by close to 95% across the country. In one of our polls that we recently conducted, and you can see some of this data up on the screen here, 60% of all HR leaders around the country were saying that their people were working longer hours now, but 40% of them actually said that they were not being any more productive. In fact, 85% came back to say that they felt that the work would be negatively impacted because of all of this. So at Thrive, starting a few weeks ago when the Prime Minister announced the extension of the lockdown, we decided to start conducting a weekly poll across organizations that we work with around the country to get a sense as to how impactful is this on our mental health. On the slide, you can actually see what the average stress score, which is 6.65 across. We've done this now for almost 15 organizations over the last few weeks. Close to 3,000 employees have gone through this assessment. But looking at it week on week, in week 1, we saw a stress score of 6.1. That had increased to 6.8 in week 2. But more importantly, the percentage of people who were reporting a strong or extreme risk score, that's a score of 8 and above, had increased from 28% to 46% just in the last 2 weeks. So this is a measurement that we're going to be tracking over a period of time to look at how the physical distancing is leading to the social isolation, which is leading to results like loneliness, anxiety, stress, depression, and the other host of mental health disorders that we're seeing. What are the 3 biggest concerns that people have? Well, it was actually no surprise for us to find out that irrespective of the industry, irrespective of the city, irrespective of their seniority, people came back with the same 3 concerns across the country. Number 1 was job security and the uncertainty of work. Number 2 was their personal health and their well-being. And number 3 was that of relationships to do with family, children and elderly parents, and the connections that they have with their peers and colleagues as well. It's no surprise, therefore, that we are all descending down Maslow's hierarchy of needs and going back to just caring about our basic needs around security, health and wellness, etc. So let's look a little bit now as to what exactly stress is. Now, from a biological context, stress is merely the physical, emotional, or mental factors that cause a body or a material to be under tension, right? We all have a stress response. In fact, it's a biological survival tool. It is something which has evolved over the millions of generations that our species and those preceding it have been around on this planet. And it has been designed as a fight, flight, or freeze mechanism to respond to a physical threat. For example, if I'm driving a car down the road at 80, 90 kilometers an hour and someone steps out in front of me, I want to have the sub-second response time to veer the car out of the way, protect myself and protect others, right? If I was being chased through the savannah by a saber-toothed tiger, I want to have the drive of cortisol and adrenaline in my body to help me propel myself as fast and as far away as I possibly can. Now, the problem with this biological response is that the same triggers from the amygdala through the limbic system, through the adrenal gland, cortisol, adrenaline, the entire same system is also stimulated when there's a non-physical threat, when there's a perceived danger, something which can be manifest such as reading a piece of bad news, such as seeing how many COVID-19 cases there are today, or looking at one's company balance sheet, wondering whether our revenue model, our team, our business will still be relevant in a post-COVID world, whatever that is to be defined as, whenever that will come to pass. Or if I'm just worried about the health of my own family, of my loved ones and my team around me. So it's the different set of triggers lead to the same responses in our physical conditionings. And it's really important, therefore, for us to appreciate that there are actually 2 types of stress in our lives. There is a good stress, what we call eustress. Now, that's when we feel excited. It happens in the short term, in the acute scenario. It's mediated by the hormone adrenaline, and it's associated with preparing and completing a task. You're actually completing something. Therefore, there's a feeling of success. And immediately after that, you return back to your pre-stress value. So this is good stress. And we need this because when we undergo situations of good stress, we actually grow because of it. The problem is there is another type of stress, which is called distress, right? That's the bad stress. That's the one which we repeatedly face, which we confront with stressors, which have a heavy toll on us, and we feel inescapable. We feel claustrophobic because of it. A key differentiator in this is that it's chronic in nature. It's there for a very, very long time. The hormonal involvement is actually very different. It's not adrenaline. It's now cortisol, which is the hormone. And it's because of the action on cortisol, on our brains, on our physical systems, on the internal organs, that we begin to then develop the diseases, chronic diseases like diabetes, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, etc. Chronic stress, bad stress, is also associated with inactivity. There's a stagnation and inability to complete a task. And therein lies the secret of the unhappiness. That long-term inactivity, which is the sequence, leads to this feeling of helplessness, as opposed to the feeling of success that we got with good stress. And this leads to all of the diseases that we see, both physical and mental, which I already described. So our work that we've been conducting at Thrive Global around the world has actually been to better understand these elements of stress and how we can then create behavioral change adaptations for people in their own lives. So let's take a step back. Let's think about what the brain is. The brain is composed of roughly 100 billion neurons, right? These are individual nerve cells which come together to form networks that we call neural circuits, which change every time we behave, every time we act, every time we feel a certain way. Now, we have these networks in our brains which are residing in these physical constructs, which are called these default patterns. Those are our programmed behaviors. Elements of our life that we have conditioned ourselves to respond, create responses to as we age. The problem is that some of these patterns end up becoming stuck, right? They're the default patterns that you end up being stuck in a default position. And that can actually lead to the expression of so many negative mental states: stress, anxiety, and depression. So the work that we've been doing with Stanford Medicine in the US actually was able to identify 8 particular biotypes. That's the image that I have up on the screen right now. So you'll see there are 8 images of the brain, and each of us human beings actually fall into one of these 8 default modes. How did they figure this out? Well, there's an amazing professor. Her name is Dr. Liam Williams. And what she did was she took 2,500 adults. She put them through a fMRI machine, which is where she looked at the imaging of the brain itself, and looking at sub-millimeter physical alterations in brain tissue when the individuals were performing specific tasks whilst they were undergoing virtual reality-induced mental states. All of these images that were conducted on the brain were then correlated with external sensors that were put on the person's scalp, and this helped to identify these 8 particular patterns. Now you can look at what these are. Rumination, where you think about the same thing over and over again. Negative bias, where you only look at the glass half empty instead of appreciating the positive. Inattention, as the picture describes on the right, there's a multifocal area of activation, and a person isn't able to hone in on the one particular task that needs to be done. So there are 8 of these patterns that we each fit into. Now, what was really interesting to see was that the manifestation of these 8, which as I described was stress, anxiety, and depression, when treated in traditional mechanisms, led to roughly a 30% success rate. However, when they controlled for the biotype, when they were able to identify which categorization a person was in, and then when we deployed a specific tool set for those each categories of individuals, we saw that success rate rise to 75%. The same study is now being extended. We're undergoing babies, children, adolescents, as well as doing genotype testing, because what we're really interested in seeing is whether these same behaviors actually stay with us as we age, or whether there's a degree of modeling and change that is expected. So whilst the biotype depicts what your status is when you're in a chronic mental health condition, it's the same neural circuitry which manifests itself in our day-to-day interactions, in the ordinary thoughts, the everyday emotions that we express. And so the Thriving Mind collaboration that we have done at Thrive Global with Stanford has really been to allow users to identify what is the pattern of my default mode, what is the upstream behavior that I then need to correct for, and therefore what are the micro steps that we can actually induce in our lives to start to mitigate some of these negative responses. So let's look at that in a little more detail. Our role takes the latest science, so work such as what we work with BJ Fogg, which is around behavioral sciences about habit formation. And we take a very large behavior and we distill it down into the smallest possible action. Now we call that a microstep. A microstep is simply something which is too small to fail. It helps a person move from knowing what to do to actually doing it. Now what this does is, by working with organizations around the world, and you can see some of them right now on the screen, in 41 countries around the world, and roughly 1 million individuals, we utilize the power of storytelling to provide these little nudges, changing behaviors, and through inspiring stories of new role models, content across various formats that allow people to, as I said, move from knowing what to do to actually doing it. So my question to all of you is, would you like to know some micro steps that might help you right now with some of the stress, anxiety, and feelings of negativity that you might have? I'm kind of guessing the answer is yes. I hope the answer is yes. So I'm going to show you 3 micro steps that you can each do starting today to actually mitigate and manage some of the stress in your life. Now, as I said, each of these micro steps is too small to fail. If you physically have the intent to undergo any of the 3 things that I'm going to be talking to you about, you will not fail at it. And over a period of time, you will start to see large-scale change in your life. So number 1, and this is perhaps my most favorite micro step across any of the series that we run right now, Thriving in the New Normal, is to actually set aside 5 minutes every day, or 5 to 15 minutes every day. That will be your dedicated coronavirus worry time. How does this work? Say 3 p.m. every day in your schedule, you say 3 to 3:15, Marcus, that's my time that I'm going to think about, actively think about all the things that I'm worried about because of coronavirus, right? Those 3 things that we saw in the Thrive poll that we've been conducting week on week. Now, the way this works is this: provided you don't trick your brain. So believe me, your brain is smarter than you are and it'll trick you back. So when you get to 3 o'clock, actively start thinking about the things that you're most worried about. Over a period of time, you will notice that that activation actually starts to lead to solution solving. Your brain will start to get into a mode that it can start thinking about, okay, these are the worries. Now, what do I need to do to solve for those particular worries, right? You do that over a period of time, you start developing the solutions. But what's even more interesting is because your brain starts to recognize that there is a pattern in my day, which is dedicated to this specific task, the background noise, the background signals that typically would be coming to you all through the day, it actually reduces in its intensity. So this is a really, really powerful way of managing your stress. Micro step number 2 is actually to plan your schedule, right? You need to take control over all the things that you need to achieve right now and actually physically put it in the schedule. So what we suggest is for 5 minutes every day, you think about all the professional tasks, all the personal tasks. You know, if you need to go grocery shopping, if you need to set up your child on his or her Zoom call at school, if you need to arrange medication for your parents, whatever that is, put it all in your schedule, make it transparently available to everyone at home and in your team, communicate that in a compassionate way, and then start executing on it. The more you plan right now, the better prepared you will be, and the less uncertainty there is in your life. Because anyway, our lives are so full of other unexplained and unexpected events. The third micro step is the positive capacity of gratitude. Now, I don't have as much time to go into this right now, but the part of the brain where gratitude is expressed is physically fundamentally different to where negative emotions, anxiety, stress, etc. reside. So by expressing gratitude, what you're doing is you're creating a physical reframe of neuronal activity away from the negative centers towards the positive center. And that is a really powerful tool to use when you're trying to overcome stress. So we may be living in an incredibly uncertain time, and we may really, really hate the period of time that we're living in. But if we can appreciate, if we can reframe the situation, we may be able to find that we can actually pause and thank the moment. And how can we do that? You see, number 1, I believe that there is time which has been given back to us, right? The time that we would be spending, particularly those of us who live in large metros, we used to spend, 90 minutes a day, 120 minutes a day commuting. We used to have to engage in social commitments which we might not be as passionate about. That time has been given back to us, and we can utilize that effectively. We can use it to strengthen the bonds. Use the same digital tools that you have available to you, Zoom, House Party, Hangouts, WhatsApp, etc., to strengthen the bonds that you have with your children, with your spouse, with your friends, with family members, people who are living near you, people who are living very, very far away as well. The other fantastic opportunity, particularly because we are not on that corporate treadmill of just running all the time, chasing success, as I said, defined by other people, is that we have the moment to slow down. So the last 2 things that I want to talk about is how we can lead ourselves and our teams through these challenges. The message which we've all heard so many times before when we've got onto an aircraft is put your own oxygen mask on first before you can think about helping others. And there's a lot of science to that. If you don't take care of your physical state, of your emotional state, of your mental state, you will not be in a position to extend that, to have the resilience, to have the battery, the internal battery to go out and help other people as well. So the mindset shift has to start with self. We need to prioritize self-care because that will lead to stronger leadership. And it's important also to recognize that none of us are superheroes. We may behave that way, particularly for leaders. We wear this mask of confidence. And it's important to do so because we want to project confidence to the outside world because our teams are feeling uncertain and they need an anchor. But an equally important part of that superhero mentality is the ability to share the load, to lean in, to recognize that we cannot solve everything. We need to empower others to grow as well, and to create the space with the compassion and empathy for our teams to then unlock their own talent. So leading individuals towards rising to meet the challenges available rather than just firefighting all the time. And ultimately to recognize that the success of leading others comes through not just in the success that we create in terms of the mini wins, but how we dealt with major challenges in our lives. We need to be completely transparent in our communication style, in helping others see that we can overcome these challenges. We need to stay positive, yes, but we need to be grounded in the reality that is required in a very candid and honest manner. And ultimately, as I said, to communicate with a curiosity and with a compassion that expresses our vulnerable side towards others, displaying the strength, but for them to understand that whilst we're leveraging all the technology that we have available to us in these uncertain times, these pandemic times that we live in, it is ultimately the humanity which we are trying to grow towards the better version of ourselves. I thank you all for your time today. I wish you all safe health, to stay at home, to stay safe. And as we say, a thrive in these very uncertain times is onward, upward, and inward. It's a pleasure to have been with you today. Take care. See you soon. Goodbye.